The changes began in whispers, almost imperceptible at first. My wife, Helena, had always been the epitome of consistency. Her routine so ingrained that even the smallest deviation stood out like a red flag against a blue sky. We'd built a quiet life in Carlington, a picturesque lakeside town where everyone knew everyone. Helena, with her sharp wit and boundless energy, was the heart of our circle of friends, while I preferred the background, happy to watch her shine. Then the rhythms of our life shifted subtly at first. Helena started working late more often, her job as a corporate events planner becoming a convenient excuse. "This gala is huge," she'd say, her tone casual but clipped. "We're swamped with last-minute details." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? But as these late nights became routine, a gnawing sense of unease took root. It wasn't just the hours. There were other, smaller things. Her phone, once left on the counter or by the bedside, now seemed glued to her hand. Notifications were quickly dismissed, the screen angled away from view. She took more care with her appearance, something I had always loved about her, but now it felt calculated. First, I brushed it off. Maybe she was simply tired of monotony and trying to rediscover herself. But the inconsistencies began to pile up. One Sunday morning, Helena rushed out for a quick coffee meeting with a client. I lingered in the kitchen, sipping coffee, enjoying the stillness of the house. That's when I saw it. A silver chain peeking out from behind the toaster. I picked it up. A locket. Not hers. Helena never wore silver. She always preferred gold. This was unfamiliar, and when I opened it, the photo inside left me cold. It was a man's face, smiling, confident. The coffee cup in my hand felt heavier. Helena was careless, yes, but she wasn't one to bring work trinkets home. I set the locket down, staring at it as if it might provide answers. When she returned that afternoon, I casually asked about the meeting. "It went well," she replied, smiling, her tone airy. "Did someone leave this behind?" I held up the locket. Her smile faltered, just for a second. "Oh, must be Tess's. She was showing me some samples for a wedding she's designing." I nodded but said nothing. The small crack in her facade was enough to confirm what I feared. Something was wrong. The pieces began to fall into place a week later. Helena hosted a networking dinner at a trendy new restaurant, and as her dutiful husband, I was there to smile and make small talk. That's when I noticed him. His name was Marcus. He was polished, confident, and all too attentive to Helena. His laugh was just a little too loud at her jokes, his eyes following her even when others spoke. She introduced him casually, like he was just another colleague, but something about the way she said his name lingered. I watched them all evening, their subtle exchanges far too comfortable for mere coworkers. The way her hand brushed his arm as she leaned in to speak, the way he whispered something that made her laugh, her cheeks flushed with more than just wine. When the night ended, Helena kissed me on the cheek and thanked me for being such a good sport. I smiled, but my mind raced. Unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong, I began to dig. It started small, checking her social media accounts, cross-referencing her work trips with her calendar. But it didn't take long to find discrepancies. The trip to New York last month, supposedly for a conference, the event didn't exist. Her late-night calls to clients, always the same number, Marcus's number. One night, while she was in the shower, I did something I'd never thought I would do. I opened her laptop. The guilt was immediate, but my need for answers was stronger. I found emails, hundreds of them. Most were professional, but buried among them were messages to Marcus that were anything but. One stood out. "I can't stop thinking about our night at the lake. Every time I see the water, I remember you. The lake, our lake." I wanted to storm into the bathroom, laptop in hand, and demand answers. But something stopped me. I didn't want a confrontation born of anger and impulse. I wanted the truth, all of it. Instead, I began documenting everything. The emails, the calendar discrepancies, the late-night phone logs. I even drove to Marcus's apartment one night, parking down the street and watching as Helena's car pulled into his driveway. She stayed for 3 hours. When I finally confronted her, it wasn't the explosive scene I had imagined. We were sitting in the living room, the silver locket on the coffee table between us. I need you to be honest with me, I said, my voice steady. Who is Marcus? Helena froze, her eyes darting to the locket. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with a shaky breath, she began to speak. She admitted to meeting Marcus through work. She claimed they had grown close, that he was a friend she confided in when work became overwhelming. Maybe I relied on him too much, she said, tears welling in her eyes. But it was never physical. I promise you that. Her words felt rehearsed, calculated to elicit sympathy without giving away too much. But I knew better. The locket, the emails, the night at the lake. None of it lined up with her story. I told her I needed space, packing a bag and leaving for the night. As I drove aimlessly through the darkened streets, one thought consumed me. If she was willing to lie about this, what else was she hiding? Little did I know. The truth was far more twisted than I could have imagined. The morning after Emily left for the guest room, the silence of our home felt oppressive. Ethan's cheerful chatter as he got ready for school was the only reprieve from the tension that hung in the air like a storm cloud. Emily and I exchanged no words beyond the necessities. His lunchbox, the car keys, the time of his soccer practice. It was a strange dance, where every step was an effort to avoid the minefield we'd created. But even as the silence persisted, I could feel her watching me. Her gaze was guarded, wary, as though she were waiting for the moment I would shatter the fragile truce. I told myself I was done investigating, that I needed to focus on Ethan and move forward. Yet the box in her car haunted me. After discovering the box of cash, I couldn't shake the image of Emily disappearing into that warehouse. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was something deeper, something darker. What was she doing with that kind of money? And who was Marcus Jennings, the man my investigator described as a linchpin in the city's underworld? That night, I made a decision. I had to see the warehouse for myself. Under the cover of darkness, I drove to the industrial district where the building loomed. It was unremarkable, a squat structure with peeling paint and broken windows. Yet it felt charged with an ominous energy. I parked at a distance, watching as men came and went, carrying boxes and briefcases with hurried precision. As I observed, I spotted him. Marcus. His presence was undeniable, charismatic, commanding, and entirely at ease amid the chaos. He spoke to a group of men, his gestures sharp and deliberate. And then, to my shock, Emily emerged from a side door. She handed him a clipboard, her movements brisk, as though she had done this 100 times. This wasn't just an affair. Emily was involved, deeply, in whatever Marcus was orchestrating. When Emily returned home that night, I was waiting for her in the living room. She barely made it through the door before I confronted her. "How long have you been working with him?" I demanded, my voice tight with controlled fury. She froze, her keys slipping from her fingers onto the hardwood floor. "What are you talking about?" "The warehouse. Marcus Jennings. The cash in your car." I stood, holding up a photo I had taken from my surveillance. A blurry but unmistakable image of her handing Marcus the clipboard. Her face turned ghostly pale. For a moment, I thought she might faint. But then, she straightened, her expression hardening. "It's not what you think," she said. "Then tell me what it is." I shot back. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've dragged our family into something illegal and dangerous." Emily's shoulders slumped, and she sank into the nearest chair. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she whispered. "It started as a favor. Marcus needed help with some events, logistics, connections. It's what I do for a living." With bundles of cash in unmarked boxes? Her silence was deafening. Over the next hour, Emily unraveled a story I could hardly believe. She claimed Marcus had approached her through a mutual friend, asking for help organizing high-profile but off-the-books events. At first, it had been legitimate work, corporate parties for clients who wanted privacy. But gradually, the events became less about entertainment and more about deals. Underground auctions, high-stakes gambling, and exchanges that skirted the law. "I didn't know what I was getting into," she insisted, tears streaming down her face. And by the time I realized, it was too late. Marcus doesn't let people just walk away. Her confession left me reeling. I wanted to believe her, but how could I? She had hidden so much, lied so easily. And yet, there was fear in her eyes that I couldn't ignore. "You should have come to me," I said, my voice breaking. "I couldn't," she replied. "I didn't want to drag you into this, and I didn't know how to get out." The next morning, as I prepared Ethan's breakfast, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Marcus Jennings himself stood on my porch, his sharp suit and cold smile sending a chill down my spine. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, his tone polite but menacing. "May I come in?" I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "What do you want?" "Just a friendly chat," he replied, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. "Emily tells me you've been asking questions. That's not a good habit to have." My fists clenched, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Whatever you've involved her in, it ends now. I'm going to the authorities." His smile didn't falter. "That wouldn't be wise. For you or your family." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact," he said. "Emily's in this too deep. You don't want to see what happens when people try to cut ties with me." He left without another word, his warning hanging in the air like a dark cloud. As soon as Marcus was gone, I called my investigator. "I need everything you can dig up on Marcus Jennings," I said. "And I need it fast." Emily and I were sitting on a powder keg, and the fuse was burning dangerously close. For Ethan's sake, I had to find a way to defuse it before everything exploded. That night, Emily and I talked. Really talked. I told her about Marcus's visit, his threats, and the danger we were in. She confessed more details about her dealings with him, her voice trembling as she described the hold he had over her. "Then we fight," I said. She looked at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "How?" "He has everything: money, power, connections." "We'll find a way," I said. "But we're not letting him destroy us." For the first time in months, I saw a flicker of hope in Emily's eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me of why I had fought so hard for our family in the first place. And as I lay awake that night, planning our next move, I realized that the battle ahead would be the hardest I'd ever fought. But I was ready, because for Ethan, for myself, and even for Emily, there was no other choice. The days after Emily's return felt like stepping into quicksand. Her confession brought new details to light, but it only deepened the mystery and made the stakes even higher. She had returned pleading for help, claiming Marcus Jennings had tightened his grip on her life. As much as I wanted to reject her outright, the danger she described, and the implications for Ethan's safety, forced me to listen. The private investigator and I doubled our efforts to unravel Marcus's operations. The more we dug, the more intricate his web appeared. He wasn't just a criminal kingpin. He was a puppeteer, pulling strings in businesses, politics, and law enforcement. His influence explained the warnings I'd received and Emily's fear. Marcus wasn't just dangerous, he was nearly untouchable. Emily's new disclosures filled in gaps but also raised new questions. She admitted that Marcus had initially lured her into his orbit with charm, leveraging her affair as a point of control. But her involvement hadn't stopped there. She had moved from reluctant participant to someone embedded in his operations, albeit under duress. "I thought I could walk away," she said one evening, her voice trembling. "But every time I tried, he pulled me back in. I didn't want to bring this into our home, but I didn't know how to stop it." While poring over evidence, the investigator made an unexpected discovery. Marcus wasn't working alone. Among his network was an insider in law enforcement, a detective who had been feeding him information and shielding him from investigations. This revelation changed everything. If we tried to go to the police, there was no guarantee it wouldn't get back to Marcus. The investigator suggested an alternative, working with a federal agency. Their resources and jurisdiction could bypass local corruption, and their interest in dismantling Marcus's operation was clear. Emily's knowledge and willingness to cooperate made her an invaluable asset, albeit a reluctant one. Convincing Emily to work with federal agents wasn't easy. She was terrified of what Marcus might do if he discovered her betrayal. But the alternative, continuing to live under his control, was equally unbearable. After a tense meeting with agents, she agreed to provide information in exchange for protection. Her knowledge of Marcus's safe houses, financial dealings, and key associates became the foundation of their case. For weeks, Emily worked with the agents while I maintained a facade of normalcy for Ethan's sake. Each day felt like a high-wire act, the threat of Marcus discovering her cooperation looming over us. Every sound at the door, every unfamiliar car on the street set my nerves on edge. The agents devised a sting operation to take down Marcus. Emily's role was critical. She was to arrange a meeting under the pretense of delivering a large payment. The plan relied on her ability to convince Marcus she was still loyal while providing the agents with everything they needed to apprehend him. The night before the operation, Emily and I sat in the living room, the tension between us palpable. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Part guilt, part gratitude. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for everything." I didn't respond immediately. "This doesn't fix what you've done," I said finally. "But if it keeps Ethan safe, it's a start." The night of the operation was excruciating. Emily left under the watchful eyes of federal agents, her every move monitored. I stayed home with Ethan, pretending everything was normal as I anxiously awaited updates. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from the investigator, each one a brief but reassuring status update. Hours later, the call came. Marcus had been arrested, along with several members of his inner circle. The evidence Emily had provided, combined with the sting's success, ensured he would face serious charges. The agents assured us that the operation's secrecy had protected Emily's role, minimizing the risk of retaliation. Marcus's arrest sent shockwaves through his organization, dismantling the empire he had built. For the first time in months, the shadow over our lives began to lift. But the damage was done. My marriage to Emily, already fragile, couldn't withstand the weight of her betrayal and the chaos she had brought into our lives. We finalized our divorce amicably, agreeing to co-parent Ethan with as little disruption to his life as possible. Emily relocated to a nearby city, her cooperation with federal agents earning her a new identity and a fresh start. I felt a complicated mix of relief and sorrow watching her go. She had made terrible choices, but she had also risked everything to right some of her wrongs. With Marcus out of the picture, I focused on rebuilding the life Ethan and I had once known. I returned to work, found solace in therapy, and reconnected with friends I had distanced myself from during the ordeal. Ethan's resilience was my guiding light. Despite everything, he remained a bright, curious, and loving boy who gave me hope for the future. One day, while we were playing in the park, he asked me, "Dad, do you think we'll ever see Mom again?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "She loves you, Ethan, and no matter where she is, she'll always want what's best for you." He seemed satisfied with that answer, his focus shifting back to the soccer ball at his feet. Watching him play, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. Months later, I received a letter in the mail. There was no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakably Emily's. Inside was a single sheet of paper, its message brief but profound. "Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. I hope one day you can forgive me. Emily." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, unsure of what to do with it. Forgiveness felt impossible, but closure was within reach. Life had thrown us into a storm, but we had weathered it, emerging bruised but not broken. As Ethan and I walked home that evening, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was ours to navigate. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to move forward. The revelations from Veronica, coupled with the murky evidence she provided, left my world hanging by a thread. It felt like I was holding a mirror up to my life, only to watch it fracture into 1,000 irreconcilable shards. What I thought was clarity about Emily's betrayal was now clouded by uncertainty, and I was left questioning everything and everyone around me. But one thing was clear: whoever was pulling the strings, I wasn't going to let them dictate my next move. The investigation into Marcus's operations continued, but as it did, I began noticing strange occurrences. My car alarm would go off in the middle of the night for no reason. A neighbor mentioned seeing an unfamiliar man lingering near my house. And then there were the calls, static-filled, anonymous, and timed perfectly to unsettle me just before I went to sleep. I reported the incidents to the investigator, who confirmed my worst fears. The remnants of Marcus's network were still active, and I was now a target. Emily's role as an informant had likely put a spotlight on us, and my digging into the operation only fanned the flames. "Be careful," the investigator warned. "They don't need Marcus to make trouble." Emily's reaction to the escalating tension was a mix of guilt and resolve. She reached out more frequently, often under the guise of checking on Ethan, but her real intention was clear. She wanted to mend what little remained of our relationship. "I know I've made mistakes," she said during one tense conversation, "but I never wanted to hurt you or Ethan. If there's any way to fix this, I'll do it." Her words rang hollow, a melody I'd heard too many times before. Still, I couldn't entirely dismiss her remorse. It was clear she was scared, of Marcus's associates, of the law, and of the tenuous connection she still had to Ethan. But her fear didn't absolve her of her actions. I told her as much, making it clear that trust was a bridge too damaged to rebuild. Her face fell, but she nodded in understanding, leaving me with the distinct feeling that she was hiding something else. As the weeks went on, the authorities began unraveling more of Marcus's empire. The fabricated evidence from Veronica complicated matters, but some of it held up under scrutiny. One day, I received a call from the lead investigator. "We've found something," he said, his tone grave, "and you're not going to like it." The evidence revealed that Marcus's operations had extended beyond fraud and blackmail. He had been involved in trafficking sensitive corporate data, leveraging Emily's marketing expertise to access client databases from her firm. The stolen information had been used to manipulate stock prices, siphon funds, and blackmail executives. But the real shock came when the investigator explained how Emily had facilitated the scheme. It wasn't just her affair with Marcus that had brought her into his world. She had actively helped him identify targets, using her position as a trusted advisor to high-profile clients. Her involvement was far more deliberate than she had let on. I confronted Emily with this new information, showing her the investigator's report. She broke down, tears streaming down her face as she admitted the full extent of her involvement. "I was in too deep," she said between sobs. "At first, it was just small things, sharing harmless details, helping him profile clients. But it spiraled out of control. I didn't know how to stop." Her confession felt like a final blow. The woman I had loved, the mother of my child, had knowingly played a role in something that endangered lives and livelihoods. Her fear, her regret, they felt real, but they couldn't erase the choices she had made. "I can't protect you from this," I said quietly. "You need to face the consequences." She nodded, her expression one of resignation. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of the Emily I had fallen in love with. Someone who, despite her flaws, was finally ready to take responsibility. Just as the authorities were preparing to charge Emily, a surprising development shifted the narrative yet again. Marcus, from his prison cell, had begun cooperating with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. His statements corroborated some of the evidence against Emily but also implicated others in his network, including high-ranking officials and corporate executives. Among his revelations was a startling claim. Veronica hadn't been acting alone. She was part of a rival faction within Marcus's network, one that sought to destabilize his empire and take control. Her interactions with me had been part of a broader strategy to sow discord and distract from her true goals. The investigators pieced together enough evidence to arrest several of Veronica's associates, effectively dismantling the remnants of Marcus's operation. Emily's cooperation, albeit belated, helped secure key convictions, reducing the likelihood of retaliation against our family. In the aftermath of these events, Emily's legal fate was sealed. Her cooperation earned her a reduced sentence, but she would still face time behind bars. Before she was taken into custody, she asked to see Ethan one last time. The meeting was heart-wrenching. Ethan, unaware of the full extent of his mother's actions, clung to her as she promised to write him letters and stay in touch. As I watched, I felt a mix of anger, sorrow, and relief. Emily's choices had shattered our family, but her willingness to own up to them offered a sliver of redemption. With Emily gone, life took on a new rhythm. Ethan and I found solace in each other, our bond strengthened by the trials we had faced. I continued working with the authorities to ensure our safety, but the shadow of Marcus's network gradually faded into the past. One day, as Ethan and I walked along the same pier where I had met Veronica, he asked, "Do you think Mom will ever come back?" "She'll always love you, Ethan," I said, choosing my words carefully. "And no matter where she is, she'll always want what's best for you." As we stood there, watching the waves crash against the wooden beams, I felt a sense of closure. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like mine to navigate. And this time I would do so with clarity and strength. The months after Emily's trial passed like a blur, the days blending together as I tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The courtroom drama had laid bare the complexity of her entanglement with Marcus, her misjudgments, and her attempts to break free. Despite the verdict that spared her the harshest punishments, the weight of her choices lingered like a storm cloud over our fractured family. At first, Emily appeared genuinely remorseful. She attended her mandated counseling sessions, fulfilled her community service requirements, and kept her distance from the life Marcus had once drawn her into. Her interactions with Ethan were cautious but warm, as though she were trying to rebuild a bridge she knew she had nearly destroyed. But something felt off. There were moments when her contrition seemed rehearsed, her apologies too perfectly timed. Her explanations for some of her past actions began to shift, small details changing as though she were rewriting her own narrative. I tried to chalk it up to her coping mechanisms, but the seeds of doubt planted long ago had begun to sprout once again. One evening, as I was organizing old documents, I found a key tucked away in a drawer. A small, nondescript key I didn't recognize. It had been in a box of Emily's things I hadn't had the heart to throw away after she moved out. Curious, I decided to ask her about it during her next visit. When I brought it up, her reaction was immediate and unsettling. She froze, her usual composure replaced by a flicker of panic before she quickly brushed it off. "It's nothing," she said, forcing a smile. "Probably just an old locker key or something." Her response only deepened my suspicion. That night, I searched online for locksmiths who specialized in safe deposit boxes, hoping the key would match a specific type. To my surprise, it was identified as belonging to a major bank downtown. The next day, I visited the bank with the key, unsure of what I would find. After a tense verification process, a clerk led me to a private room and placed a small metal box in front of me. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a collection of items that told a story Emily had never shared. There were bundles of cash, a fake ID with her photo under a different name, and a burner phone. The phone contained a single active text thread with an unknown number, dated just a week prior. The messages were cryptic but ominous. "Have you tied up all loose ends? They can't find out about the second account." My heart raced. The second account? What else was she hiding? I took photos of everything in the box and returned it exactly as I'd found it, my mind reeling with possibilities. That evening, I confronted Emily. I showed her the photos, demanding an explanation. At first, she denied everything, her voice rising in indignation. But as I pressed her, her facade crumbled. She admitted that the box was hers but insisted it was a precaution, a way to protect herself if Marcus's associates ever came after her. Her explanation didn't sit right. Why would she need a fake ID and burner phone if she was truly trying to move on? And who was she still in contact with? It became clear that Emily's ties to Marcus's world weren't as severed as she'd claimed. When I told her I was taking the evidence to the authorities, her demeanor shifted entirely. The vulnerability and remorse she had displayed for months vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating edge I hadn't seen before. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into," she said, her voice low and steady. "You think you've won, but you're not as safe as you think." Days later, I received a package at my door. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "You deserve to know the truth." The drive contained hours of recorded conversations between Marcus and Veronica, as well as encrypted financial records. Among them were logs of payments made to someone identified only as EK, Emily's initials. The recordings painted a chilling picture. Emily hadn't just been coerced. She had been a key player in Marcus's schemes from the start, helping him launder money and evade detection. Her narrative of victimhood had been carefully constructed, a way to garner sympathy while quietly covering her tracks. Faced with this new evidence, I had a choice to make. Turning Emily in would mean severing her connection to Ethan entirely, leaving him without his mother. But sparing her risked allowing her deceit to continue, potentially putting us both in danger. After days of agonizing over the decision, I chose to present the evidence to the authorities. Emily was arrested quietly at her apartment, the last remnants of her carefully curated life crumbling around her. Ethan didn't understand why his mother had disappeared, and explaining it to him was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I knew it was the right choice. Protecting him meant removing the lingering threat she posed, no matter how much it hurt. In the aftermath, life settled into a new kind of normal. Ethan and I leaned on each other, our bond growing stronger as we navigated the challenges of rebuilding. I continued working with law enforcement, ensuring that Marcus's network was dismantled for good. As for Emily, I received occasional updates about her case, but chose not to dwell on them. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. The love we had shared was now a distant memory, a reminder of how quickly trust could be shattered. One evening, as I watched Ethan play in the yard, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The road we had traveled had been fraught with pain and betrayal, but we had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. Looking back, I realized that the truth isn't always black and white. It's messy, layered, and often comes at a cost. But no matter how painful it is, the truth has a way of setting you free. And as I stood on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I knew that Ethan and I were finally free to build the life we deserved. One grounded in honesty, resilience, and hope.